It's time for the grand return! Hello everyone, I'm Just Some Reader, and welcome to One Man's Book Trash, where I dive into what people don't want to find some real treasure. Today, we're diving back into the Redwall series with its second installment, Mossflower. If you saw my first video on the eponymous Redwall novel, you'll remember that I got this book at a thrift store along with 5 other Redwall books. What I didn't realize at the time, that I only found out when I started reading Mossflower, is that this copy is very special. It's actually a signed copy by Brian Jacques himself. I'm so stupid. I can't believe I didn't open the book to notice it before. Naturally, I had to double check my Redwall copies to see if they were signed. The first book wasn't, but all of the other copies were signed. I'll put them all up on screen right now. So since we talked about Brian Jacques and what the Redwall series is in the first video, why don't we talk about how this book could have been signed? During his life, Jacques did a series of book tours to promote new books he had written. If you somehow don't know what a book tour is, it's essentially where an author goes around to different places, usually bookstores, where they promote their new book and meet fans while they're there. The Redwall Wiki actually has a list of all the tours Brian Jacques did. It's very likely that my copy of Mossflower and the rest of my Redwall books were signed at one of these events. The most recent book I own is the mass market paperback version of Pearls of Lutra, which was released by Ace in 1998. So it really could be any of the book tours listed on the site. We can at least narrow it down by region. I live in Southern California, so our options are April 2001 in various parts of LA and San Diego, April 2003 at the LA Times Book Festival, and November 2007 in various locations in Southern California. How it even ended up in my neck of the woods, but it somehow did, and that's pretty freaking sick. The Redwall Wiki has a lot of YouTube links to videos captured during these book tours, which I highly recommend perusing. I've linked it down in the description below, and while you're down there, like and subscribe. The author really was a treasure based on these videos. One of his past careers was stand-up entertainer, and you can really tell by the way he's performing for these children. He's really funny, and you get the sense that he actually cares about entertaining the children. Each video has a nostalgic quality to it. Handheld camera and uploaded in 10-minute snippets because that's all YouTube allowed back then. I remember when I was a kid sitting around at the local libraries with all the wee lads as someone performed for us. It was actually pretty fire. These videos are exactly like that, so if you want to feel a little bit nostalgic, go ahead and take a gander. But let's get on to the actual book, shall we? Where the legendary saga of Redwall began. When the clever and greedy wildcat Tsarmina becomes queen of 1,000 eyes and ruler of all Mossflower Woods, she is determined to govern the peaceful woodlanders with an iron paw, bringing every otter and hedgehog, every mouse and squirrel whimpering to their knees. But the brave mouse Martin and quick-talking mouse thief Gonf meet in the depths of Cotier Castle's dungeon. With the aid of all the woodlanders, the two escape and resolve to end Tsarmina's tyrannical rule. Joined by Kinney the Mole, Martin and Gonf set off on a dangerous quest for Salamandastron, Mountain of Dragons, where they are convinced that their only hope, Boar the Fighter, still lives. This is another entry into the Redwall series, and as I was reading it, I could very clearly see the formula starting to form. Especially when you compare it to the first book. There are 2 narratives happening at the same time that the book flips between. One narrative features a war between the Woodlanders and the antagonist's army, while the second narrative features a quest where the main character must retrieve something to help fight the war back home and hopefully win it for the Woodlanders. In Redwall, you had the rat warlord Clooney sieging Redwall Abbey, while Matthias is off on a quest to retrieve the sword of Martin the Warrior. In Mossflower, we get the mad wildcat queen Tsarmina fighting the Woodlanders as Martin the Warrior himself is on a quest to retrieve Boar the Fighter, who is notably not a boar, he's a badger. There's a large animal that slowly picks off the enemy's forces that is eventually defeated. Osmodeus the snake in the first book, and Argular the eagle in this one. There's a special animal used by the enemy, Shadow and Gloomer. There's a shrew named Logalog, child mice taken prisoner, etc, etc. It's a simple yet effective formula, and I wouldn't be surprised if it were to recur in later installments of the series. They kind of feel like stock characters that can be tweaked, mixed, and matched depending on the situation of the novel. But that doesn't make Mossflower feel derivative. In fact, Mossflower does a lot of things differently with the formula from the first book that makes it feel fresh and new, while also being very familiar. First of all, let's talk about POV and structure. From this point forward, there will be spoilers, so you have been warned. The book is framed at the outset as a story told by an old badger named Bella of Brockhall to a young mouse. It's a narrative already set in stone as legend, a story within a story. By the end of the book, when the story has concluded, we return to Bella and the young mouse. Something odd about that framing, though, is the POV. The book discards the alternating good chapter and bad chapter of the first book, instead hops between different POVs within a single chapter. These viewpoints are from all sides of the story, both ally and enemy. This makes the story feel like a TV show, hopping between the different characters and settings. One moment you're in Mossflower, and the next moment you're on the quest with Martin. But it never feels jarring. It flows really well from perspective to perspective, even if it's for only a few lines. But that also makes the framing odd. Bella is a character within the story that she's telling. It would make sense for her to tell the young mouse about her own experience and what she learned from the other Woodlanders, especially concerning Martin the Warrior's quest. But what about the enemy's side? Did she just make it up? Like, how did she know what Tsarmina was doing in her chambers, or that the captains were gorging themselves on food inside the larder? It's a minor note since you kind of totally forget that there's a framing at all and are zapped into the world of the story. But it's a note nonetheless. Let's dive into the two main plots of this novel, the war and the quest. The war in Mossflower feels very different from the one in Redwall, even though the Woodlanders are once again on the defensive. In Redwall, the war between Clooney's army and Redwall Abbey felt like a classic medieval battle. One side is trying to capture a castle the other is defending, and they are constantly trying to outsmart the other's plans to do so. Mossflower, on the other hand, is straight up guerrilla warfare. The Woodlanders have formed a group called Quorum, or the Council of Resistance in Mossflower. They're trying to go up against this brutal, oppressive regime. They're outnumbered, but they're using the terrain to their advantage. Squirrels shoot arrows from the treetops, otters swim in the river, moles dig, etc., etc. The evil army of Tsarmina has trouble facing their tactics. I enjoyed this part of the book, but not as much as I did the war within the first book of Redwall. Part of this, I think, is because of the antagonists themselves. Tsarmina is the wildcat queen of Kotir, who took control after plotting with the vixen Fortunata to poison Tsarmina's father, Verdaga Green Eyes. I really enjoyed her descent into madness and how her demands of the army kept getting weirder and weirder. Like how she sends one of her officers to, pull on everyone's tail to make sure they aren't fakes. Or her slaying one of her own men because she thinks it's her escaped brother Gingiveer. I also really liked her fear of water. It's a great fear to give to a cat, especially given how Kotir is eventually defeated in the end. I just didn't find her army as threatening as Clooney's. They're definitely similar characters. They're both leaders who command those below them through fear, but Clooney felt way more cunning through all the schemes he hatched to try and get through Redwall Abbey. Even though only one worked, it felt like the denizens always had to be on their toes. And that whip-like tail Clooney lashes his men with sticks in my memory. As for Tsarmina, it kind of feels like she sends her men into the woods, and then the men get pelted by arrows and slings. The battles therefore feel kind of samey. The most cunning plan she hatches is sending the vixen Fortunata to go infiltrate the enemy base and try to find out where it is, compared to the 4 different schemes Clooney makes up. There's even a fox named Bane who shows up with a band of mercenaries 3/4 of the way through the book that basically tells Tsarmina, yeah, your army is terrible, you're really gonna need some help. Because it's true. Her army is terrible and she's a bad leader. Maybe that's the point? But the final fight between her and Martin at the end of the book easily clears the final fight between Matthias and Clooney. It's just incredible. Truly epic. And I mean that in the epic fantasy sense, not like the epic, late epic meme sense. Now let's talk about the quest. Perhaps I didn't like the war much, but I cannot say that about the quest. This quest easily clears the one Matthias goes on in Redwall, hands down. There are quite a few factors to this. One of them is Martin himself. Yes, we get to learn about this legendary warrior, but that's not at all why I like it. Martin's not learning to be a warrior like Matthias did. While I liked Matthias, Martin is already a seasoned warrior from the north before he arrives at Redwall, and from the beginning he's really interesting. His introduction in the first chapter is great. He's carrying his father's rusty sword as he trudges through the snow, and he eventually gets in a fight with a weasel and punches him. The whole time as he's being dragged into Cotyr's prison, he's a fighter and fighting everyone to try and get out. And with Tsarmina snapping the rusty sword his father gave him, that gives him a clear reason why he needs to defeat Tsarmina. But also wearing the broken blade around his neck was just such a cool ass image, man. Since he's already a warrior, the quest to get Bor the Fighter is less about Martin becoming a warrior, but to have confidence in himself to defeat Tsarmina. He doesn't receive a new sword, but a new blade for the handle he already had from his father. It's saying that he doesn't need to discover something new like Matthias, but to rediscover something he already had. Another huge factor is that Martin is not alone. In Redwall, it was always Matthias as the lone quester. There were certainly companions he met along the way, such as Warbeak and the Gwosum, but those were always temporary. In Mossflower, Martin is accompanied from the beginning by Gonf the Mouse Thief and Dinny the Mole, and later Logalog the Shrew. This makes the quest so much more enjoyable. Camaraderie can be built between them, and as such, you get to know and care about them better. They're able to play off each other and work together when they encounter whatever gets in their way. Gonf is great. He's a roguish character, calling himself the Prince of Mouse Thieves, who helps Martin break out of Cotyr's prison using tools like cheese to grease up locks. A little gross, but okay. He's also the only character who really has a love interest, that being Columbine the Mouse, who has an unfortunate name, by the way. It trips me up every time I read it for obvious reasons to an American, though it's not her fault at all. Columbine takes a similar role to Cornflower in Redwall, but she's way more tactically minded and has a little bit more agency. Back to Gonf, a big part of his character are all the songs he comes up with, which are all very fun, though they can sometimes get a bit confusing when it comes to POV. When a song is written in the book, there's a space between it and the two different paragraphs before and after it, whether or not the POV changes. This only happens a few times in the book, however, so it's pretty minor. I have less to say about Dinny, though. He's kind of just a mole. He feels more like comic relief, especially with how the way moles speak in Redwall. But he's mostly a cute little friend that picks up seashells and digs his friends out of trouble if need be. This book's Logalog is pretty cool. He's the former leader of a colony of shrews that were attacked by sea rats, and is actually a very skilled boat captain himself. He joins the party pretty early on to get back to his people and eventually liberates them from the sea rats. The biggest factor in making this quest so good, though, is the journey itself. There are so many more interesting places that Martin's party travels to that really opens up the world of Redwall. In the first book, Matthias was just exploring Redwall Abbey and the surrounding area, which, don't get me wrong, was still interesting, but can kind of sort of blend together. Mossflower, on the other hand, takes us all the way to the west with a bunch of different locales. Flat grasslands with pools of water where swans reside, tall mountains with dark caverns with bats below it, marshlands with frogs and a giant eel. The beach and the sea with its shores of gulls and crabs in the tide pools. And by far the most impressive, the mountain of the fire lizard, Salamandastron. Salamandastron is so rad. I love Salamandastron, man. This is a place that keeps sea rat pirates from attacking further inland because of its legend and also because of those who protect it. Badger lords and groups of hares. Bor the Fighter, Bella's grandfather, is actually here, strong despite his age, and forges a new blade for Martin and trains him in the art of battle to be as strong as a badger warrior. But Bor doesn't accompany the party back to Mossflower Wood. Instead, he dies defeating a horde of sea rats led by one named Ripfang, as was prophesized on some stone. It was a pretty great send-off for the character that we kind of just met. It was rad as hell. I can't lie, it was rad as hell. The party also steals the sea rat's ship and liberates all the prisoners upon it, a lot of which were actually Logalog's people. In fact, on the return journey back to Mossflower Wood, they pick up like all of Logalog's people to help aid the fight back home, returning by the river all the way back to the wood. And then we come to the ending. While Martin was away, the Woodlanders actually came up with a plan to flood Kotir with water from the river Moss, so they can defeat Tsarmina and her troops in one fell swoop. When they start, it's only a little trickle, but when Martin's party comes back, they're able to stop the river with the ship by sinking the ship, and then the water comes surging in. The conclusion to this book was incredible. The visual of Kotir sinking into the water while a ballista is pelting with boulders and the enemies are all trying to escape the sinking castle was just mwah, chef's kiss. By the way, that ballista was made by Martin's friend Tim Ballisto, who was a prisoner on the Sea Rat's ship. I must have missed something when he was freed, because they started talking about Tim Ballisto. Like, Martin was going like, oh, my good friend Tim Ballisto. Everyone knows my good friend Tim Ballisto, right? I love my good friend Tim Ballisto. And I was like, who the fuck is this guy? Where did he come from, man? Huh? I might just be stupid, though. I don't know. And I know I touched on it briefly, but the final fight between Martin and Tsarmina was just... it was just so incredible. A duel between a cat and a mouse. What is more classic than that? It's a dirty and bloody fight, but Martin eventually comes out on top after a long duel. When he was knocked down, he stood back up, unbending, finally defeating Tsarmina through her fear of him. Him standing there like a badger warrior as she's backing away from him out of fear into the very other fear of water, the lake that Kotir has been sunk into, eventually getting pulled down by its throes and drowning in its murky waters. I like that Martin didn't win easily here. It was something he fought tooth and nail for, almost killing him, but he still was able to claim victory. And then everyone basically lives happily ever after, with them making plans to build Redwall Abbey, Gonf and Columbine settling in, and St. Ninians, etc., etc. Now let's touch on a bunch of different things about the book, but I don't really know how to transition between them very well. Let's just go for it, shall we? Good and evil is actually done really well here, I think, especially toward the end. Skipper the Otter and Lady Amber the Squirrel actually want to kill all of Tsarmina's army, but Martin stops them because killing is wrong. It's evil. I think it shows that even good animals, like otters and squirrels, can have evil tendencies. Tsarmina's army also isn't exactly evil per se, just selfish oafs who are really afraid of their leader. Also, you'd expect all the cats to be evil, but not all of them are. Gingerveer is a good one, for example. It doesn't really feel like the different animals are fully good or fully evil. They're just different amounts of both. Each chapter of my edition has these illustrations at the beginning, which are all very charming and some of them pretty funny. Like, look at the illustration of this hair. Why does he look so zonked out, man? I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the opening of the story is done really well. I'm a sucker for winter and snow scenes. So just shoving us right into the middle of winter with this lone mouse traveler braving the cold with only a cloak and a rusty sword, and then revealing that that traveler is Martin the Warrior? It was a great way to say that this book isn't like the first. It was just so striking. There's an otter named Mask who's actually really cool. He was a master of disguise that infiltrated Kotir to break out Gingerveer and two kidnapped hedgehog children. He was a really cool character, and it was unfortunate to see him die so soon. And of course, we have to talk about the food. The food! The food! I don't know what it was this time around, but the food in this novel felt so much more numerous and vivid than the first one. Every time we're in Brock Hall with the Quorum, it feels like we're getting a description of the food. And what's interesting is that Jacques doesn't actually use many words to describe each dish. Yeah. Take this passage from page 90 to 91. Martin had sat at many tables. Farm tables, inn tables, and, more often than not, any handy piece of rock where he could lay his food. Now he sat back and surveyed the board before him with wonder. Bulrush and water shrimp soup provided by the otters. A large flagon of the skipper's famous hot root punch. Hazelnut truffle. Blackberry apple crumble. Baked sweet chestnuts. Honeyed toffee pears. And maple tree cordial. A joint effort by hedgehogs and squirrels. The Lomehenge and Mossflower mice had combined to provide a number of currant and berry pies, seed cake and potato scones, and a cask of October ale. By far the biggest single offering was a colossal turnip and tater and beetroot and beaten and deeper and ever pie, with tomato chutney baked by the Formal and his team. Yum! Aside from the deeper and ever pie, each dish is simply described with the ingredient and the type. This lets the imagination run wild, thinking about how each pie or scone or cordial or what have you to actually taste like. There's also variety. Listing so many different dishes evokes a sense that this is truly a feast. This tracks for every feast too. It feels like every meal has so many different delectable dishes. In a similar vein, the scale at which Redwall operates at makes even the most mundane animals, such as the swans and the eel, feel as fantastical as actual fantasy monsters like dragons and trolls. The swans simply protecting their eggs feels as dangerous as wyverns doing the same. Or freeing the snakefish from within the frog's scream hole feels like unleashing a dune worm. It's really impressive what Jacques can do with just a regular animal. Granted, it can talk, but I believe that's all I have to say about Mossflower. I'm going to give this book 2 thumbs up. If you love quest fantasy, little woodland creatures, or the previous Redwall book, I highly recommend it. It's great for people of any age. It's just plain fun and a joy throughout. I'm still not sure if I prefer this or the first book more. They're certainly very close. It's also not a bad starting place if you want to get into the Redwall series, but I'd recommend reading the first book, Redwall, first. But that's going to be it for today's episode of One Man's Book Trash. Let me know what you thought of Mossflower in the comments below, and while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I've got a lot of secondhand books to get into, and some other ideas for book-related content in the future. So join me next time on One Man's Book Trash as we take a look at B. Sando's The Hero of Ages, the final entry in his Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. It was only a matter of time before we got to talk about the Cosmere on this channel. I'll see you there!